Hi, everyone. Welcome to Crisis Campaigning in Your Community. My name is Sheetal Deer. I am the Senior Crisis Campaigner at Amnesty International USA, and this is a webinar recording from AI USA Crisis Campaigns. The date is October 15th, 2018. Once again, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming to this webinar. We really appreciate it. My name is Sheetal Deer, as I mentioned. I'm the Senior Crisis and Tactical Campaigner at Amnesty USA. The agenda today is to get you all accustomed to crisis campaigning and what it requires in your community. And the objective is to empower you to undertake various crisis campaigns in your community and really move the needle forward, as we know that Amnesty members are empowered and engaged and are charged with doing. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. First off, I'd like to go through a pop for this crisis campaigns webinar. The purpose is to build a foundational understanding of AI USA's approach to crisis response work. Participants are empowered to use their new skills to engage with AI USA crisis campaigns in their own communities. The objective here is to make sure that the workshop will introduce you to crisis work and explain AI USA's approach to identifying and executing crisis campaigns. Attendees will participate in breakout sessions to A, identify their skills, B, evaluate how they can use those skills to respond to different crises, and C, learn how to lead crisis work within their communities. The process is a 1.5-hour training. So as you all may have figured out, this is a webinar, so we won't be doing as many breakout sessions. However, you should know that I, Sheetal Deer, am always available to help you all through any crisis campaigning questions you may have, or to lead a specific breakout session for your group or for your community in how to do crisis campaigning. This webinar is meant to be a primer. Amnesty International's mission. So just to remind everybody and give us all that kind of North Star that we can look towards when we're doing this work, Amnesty International is a Nobel Peace Prize winning global movement of more than 7 million people who campaign for a world where human rights are enjoyed by all. The organization investigates and exposes abuses, educates and mobilizes the public, and works to protect people wherever justice, freedom, truth, and dignity are denied. That's a pretty hefty mission, and I'm sure you all, just as I am, are very proud to take it forward. What's a campaign? This is a great question. Just to start us off so we all know that we're talking about the same thing, a campaign is a project that is A, highly focused, meaning it's about one specific thing. B, it's time bound, so it's not like, it can be 1 to 3 years, it can be 2 to 6 weeks, but it's not, you know, something like achieving racial equality, which could take eons or something like that. C, it's winnable, meaning there's like a specific goal or objective, and once we've achieved that objective, for example, stopping certain legislation or getting certain laws passed or things like that, the campaign is over. And then D, the campaigns are strategically planned, coordinated, and communicated to achieve explicitly defined external goals and objectives. Now, D is one that's extremely important. I think that for campaigns to be successful, you have to be planned and coordinated, and you have to communicate out to your allies and to the people that you're working with to make sure that whatever you're doing is grounded not only in reality, but is grounded in strategic goals. So just to make sure, a lot of people, I think, now in campaigning, because it's such a crowded space, tend to just throw a lot of tactics at the wall. Because Amnesty International is so specific about who we are and what we want to achieve, you should always make sure that human rights impact is underwriting whatever you're doing. Other organizations may take different tacks, but here at Amnesty, if it will lead to human rights impact, if it will achieve a tangible change in someone's daily life or their existence, that's really what we're about and what we're going for here. A campaign can use a range of tactics, including research. So you all know the reports that we put out on as much as a monthly basis, coming from the IS Global Movement, as well as regional offices, as well as sections. Research is a huge thing that Amnesty is known for. It's used for Senate testimony. It's used for testimony at the UN. It informs a lot of the work we do, that kind of first person on the ground research. Press work, which means getting a story, at any level, whether it be the New York Times or like the local Gazette, something like that. Social media, so using our digital channels to empower activists and to get the story out, whether that be Twitter, Instagram, any one of those mediums. Government relations is basically lobbying and how we leverage our relationships within government agencies with ourselves to kind of move work forward. And then obviously engaging member leaders and field organizers, which is, I would assume, a lot of the people who are listening to this webinar right now. A campaign can also be city or state oriented. So our end gun violence campaigns are really based in New Orleans and Chicago. They can be national in nature. So right now our refugees campaign, community sponsorship, Longer Table Initiative are all focusing on things that are national in scope or global. So last year, the crisis campaigns team undertook the Rohingya campaign, working on behalf of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar and their statelessness and issues that they were facing. So yeah, just to reiterate, a campaign can use a range of tactics, and it can be city, state, national, or global in scope. That's the beauty of working for a place like Amnesty International, is you really can say this is a global movement or a global campaign, and people from all around the globe will work on it. So that's pretty exciting and something that's very rare about our organization. Some perspectives to consider when you're doing this kind of work. One is global coordination, which is really, really important. AIUSA is just a section in a movement of many, many sections that work underneath an umbrella institution called the International Secretariat. So aligning the AIUSA strategy with either a regional or the global movement is always in your favor, because I think AIUSA's add value in a lot of these conversations is adding that international perspective. So say you're doing a project on refugees or running a campaign on refugees, and you're lobbying, you know, someone from the State Department. If you can get someone from Japan, someone from Denmark, someone from India, and say someone from, you know, the Ukraine section to all speak up and, you know, profess or champion their support for your goals, it makes your argument just that much stronger. Not only are you speaking as an American from the American section and lobbying someone who works at the State Department, but now you have all of these international voices to consider, which is really, it adds a lot of heft to your argument. So that's something to consider. The second thing is gender integration. This has been a huge push from the top for the last few years now, and it's something that we're very, very serious about here in campaigns, considering gender norms and stereotypes, ensuring that the visibility of non-cis males is increased, and expanding our understanding of gender in all human rights campaigning. For way too long, these considerations have been overblown or maybe not considered as heavily. And now moving forward in terms of crisis campaigning and campaigning in general, we're going to be taking the gender integration lens very seriously and integrating it into all of our work. The last thing is diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sure you're familiar with this terminology, but one thing you should definitely consider is whether the issue that you're campaigning on affects different groups differently, and are the solutions that you're proposing rooted in equity? Is the language that you're using taking into consideration different communities that might be impacted from the work that you're doing? And making sure to kind of cross your T's and dot your I's when you're talking to people or getting sort of consultations done about various campaigns that you could run. Always consider this lens, because it can do so much to make your work just that much richer and more robust and impactful. Yeah, so Amnesty International, Crisis Prevention and Response. So Amnesty International, as you guys know, mobilizes AI supporters and members to take action on human rights crises around the world. We also pressure US officials, foreign governments, international organizations to protect human rights defenders and civilians displaced by violence. We provide humanitarian relief where we can, and we ensure accountability for human rights violations. More importantly, what is a crisis? That's really why we're here. A crisis, as defined by AIUSA, is urgent. It aligns with the priority campaigns. Right now, as of October 2018, the priority campaigns for AIUSA are End Gun Violence and the Refugees campaign. C, the response for the crisis issue will contribute to organizational goals. D, AI USA has the potential for impact, and E, AI USA involvement presents a clear value add in the space. So this is what I was talking about when I was talking about our international perspective. Oftentimes right now, especially post-Trump, the advocacy space is pretty crowded. There's a lot of voices in the space. You also want to lift up the voices of the people whose stories that are, in question, or whose lives or livelihoods are in jeopardy or compromised, as opposed to kind of using our loudspeaker. We don't want to drown anybody out. But if and when AI USA involvement presents a clear value add in the space, it's always worth it to try to get involved to benefit those who we're vying for and speaking alongside. So that's something. What is crisis campaigning? Well, in domestic situations, crisis campaigning is the vehicle for the public's resistance overall. In international situations, crisis campaigning aims to have an impact on human rights violations on a massive scale. So what do I mean by that? In domestic situations, for example, a lot of the refugee work, a lot of our refugee work over the last couple years post-Trump has been in relation to either like the Muslim ban or the presidential determination on how many refugees can enter the country, things like that. In those situations, we've used the tools available to the Crisis Campaigns Unit to kind of leverage public voices and people who have been directly impacted, and kind of connecting those people with decision makers or influencers, so that the narrative, so that we can kind of influence the narrative overall. Right now, we're doing a public comment. We're opening it up for a public comment on Flores, which is like a court decision that relates very heavily to child separation issues and child detention issues. So that's usually what happens with crisis campaigning domestically in the US. It's usually like Trump does something crazy, and, well, crazy is a subjective term, but Trump does something, and then, our movement, the global movement as well, has something to say about it, and we galvanize those voices together in opposition. Then in international situations, crisis campaigning aims to have an impact on human rights violations on a massive scale. So that means basically like the Rohingya last year, we got a humanitarian aid bill passed. We had requests to make sure that humanitarian aid workers could get into the camps, to make sure that conditions that the Rohingya were facing were in line with humanitarian standards and as per Geneva Conventions and things like that. So international situations are usually kind of either humanitarian aid packages or bills, or, ending kind of deals and relationships or trade embargoes that exist thus far. Whereas domestic situations, it's usually using our loudspeaker to communicate how the human rights community feels about a certain issue. Types of crises at AIUSA, there are several. So one is a national security incident. That would be, for example, any sort of nuclear attack, any sort of, repeat of 9/11, anything that would compromise U.S. citizens and result in human rights violations. The second thing is human rights violations on a massive scale. So that's the Rohingya are a perfect example of that. Or, the forgotten war in Yemen, what's going on, the famine in South Sudan, things like that. 3, legislation on a fast track. That's when something is kind of headed from the House and Senate, like straight to either a presidential veto or not a president, signing a bill into law. And we want to make sure that the people who are signing said bill or are involved in like the negotiations know how the human rights community feels about said legislation. And then 4th, powerful opportunities to amplify good. This is where a lot of our HRD work comes into play, right for rights, things like that, where there are tactical opportunities where someone's done something really, really positive and we want to make sure people know about it. Also, our ambassador of consciousness. So this year it's Colin Kaepernick. That would fall under number 4. So it's a good crisis. So first off, I wanted to talk about the scenario in Myanmar and talk about how the crisis campaigns kind of dealt with that. As you may know, this is just a case study for us to kind of understand better the kind of work that you can do. So over 650,000 Rohingya fled across the border from Myanmar to Bangladesh due to the Myanmar military's relentless campaign of violence A lot of you must have saw the reporting that came out of the IS and the reporting that came out of the crisis researchers who worked on the issue. What was going on in Myanmar was tantamount to genocide. It was pretty bad, and the ethnic cleansing that was going on there, it's not something that we could qualify exactly as genocide because the meaning of that is very specific, but we have been able to get clearance to call it ethnic cleansing. So we basically mobilized all levers of the organization to make a change. With public affairs, we worked on with press and digital to put out assets, to put out news releases, to put out reports, to put out graphics, to put out anything, marketing initiatives that basically told the world what was going on there. Government relations, we passed a House bill on the issue. We worked with the IS, which is the International Secretariat, once again, on virtual reality and other assets that kind of made the narrative more mainstream as to what was going on. Our field team did an amazing job of amplifying the issue at regionals. I gave a few talks. Research put out reports around which members and supporters could organize and coordinate. And then members, you guys gave concerts, there were folded doves, you lobbied on the Hill for Lobby Day. There was so much that was happening, and Myanmar really was a beautiful example of all of the different facets of the organization coming together to make a change. So something that I've really tried to iterate as many times as possible in this presentation, we see you guys as the solution. Set a moral compass, amplify heroes and human rights defenders, provide a different solution, and hold perpetrators accountable. The strength of Amnesty International truly is its member base. And so if you can set a moral compass and decide really what change you want to make, if you can amplify heroes and human rights defenders, meaning find protagonists in the story whose voices you want to amplify and whose stories you want to tell, if you can provide a different solution, so that's when you're bringing your kind of pitch or your campaign to people who are influencers or decision-making, offering a solution as opposed to just saying something bad is always better. So anytime, even if you're, talking to your boss, complaining about something versus saying like, hey, I think this would work better. The same thing goes for crisis campaigning. And D, hold perpetrators accountable. So really knowing that pressure point where you can hold someone accountable to make sure something similar isn't going to happen again is the point here. Power mapping. So this is something we do a lot as campaigners and something I wanted to introduce to folks as they're doing crisis campaigning. A lot of times in crisis campaigning situations, there are decisions that need to be made by influencers or by very important people in a quick time frame. And sometimes you need to consider the messenger through which you are communicating the desired change. So here we have a power mapping exercise, which I can do with you or send out a worksheet. If you're interested, just contact your AIUSA contact and they will get to me and I'll get you this worksheet. But basically, you want to figure out what relationships, whether it be between people, organizations, or institutions, do we need to understand to promote positive change? So you would kind of take the person who's your target, say it's President Trump, and you would think about all the people in President Trump's day that influence his ability to make a decision for or against something or just around an issue. And you kind of draw those out to help yourself better understand whether it be voters, whether it be leaders in the private sector, national security folks, DOJ folks, faith-based organizations. You want to map all those people out and then see as AIUSA or as this student group or as this, local group, who do I have connections with? Who can I influence? Who can in turn influence President Trump? And that's what's known as power mapping. And it's a really, really valuable resource. I think when you're trying to go after a specific kind of legislation, you're trying to get something specific passed, knowing who the power map is and who the players are can be totally, it's just so valuable, and it's a really good tactic. An example issue, how do we increase the number of refugees admitted to the US? So this is something that we engaged in heavily as Amnesty last year and a little bit as Amnesty this year on the presidential determination. We worked mostly with resettlement agencies and faith-based organizations, as well as trying to influence voters in communicating out what the human rights concerns were surrounding allowing fewer refugees into the US. And then we tried to get those groups to leverage their lobbying interests with the Republican Party and outside the Republican Party to at least like get our side of the story told. So that's power mapping. It's a really, really, really good resource. If you're trying to come up with some creative tactics, if you're trying to come up with really like a plan or a strategy, this is a really, really good place to start. So this is probably the most important slide in the entire presentation. And if you're going to take anything away from this webinar, it is press plus advocacy equals impact. So what I mean by that is press, meaning media attention, social media, digital media, traditional media outlets, mainstream media outlets, whatever it is. Press, so visibility plus advocacy, which means like that kind of like nitty-gritty policy work equals impact. And I'm going to go through A through G with you here and just give you some examples of what I've done in the past. You should know that with any of this, whenever you're planning a sort of crisis campaign or any campaign in general, thinking about how to combine these two tracks, press and advocacy, to pack a punch is very much in your best interest. So letters to the editor plus legislative movement. So say there's legislation on the fast track on an issue like family separation. So there was the zero tolerance policy. Maybe they're going to making that law in Arizona, right? What you would do, or what I would do as a student coordinator in Arizona, is I would inform like a lot of the members that I'm working with about what the issue is, what our stance is, and I would get them to write letters to the editor in each of their communities, as well as kind of statewide newspapers and legislative movement. If you guys didn't know already, House representatives and senators have people or legislative aides who are literally tasked with reading local newspapers to try to make sure that they're in touch with what their constituents think and feel. And letters to the editor, especially ones that get published, are a really, really good way to communicate to your legislators on a federal level, as well as on a state-based level or on a local level, how you feel and where the community is at. B, targeting members of Congress plus a campaign stunt. So 6 or 7 months ago, we were trying to do something, I believe it was on family separation, and we were going to do something on the White House lawn, and we basically told a bunch of staffers, congressional staffers, through Twitter, saying like, hey, your boss should show up to this event because we're going to be doing this thing on the White House lawn. And we got people there, and we did a quick stunt, and everybody noticed, and the press came because there were a ton of people who were paying attention. Legislative advocacy plus targeted Facebook and print ads. This is something that this is a tactic we employed for the Myanmar work. Basically, we were trying to get this House bill passed, and we sent out a missive through targeted Facebook ads in certain states for legislators who we knew were on the fence. And basically, the message was, you know, you're going home for Christmas, but a lot of these people don't have a home anymore, and like, please, like, try to think about them and move the work that you've already been doing forward a little bit if you can. And it worked. We got the bill passed. Demonstrations plus important dates and anniversaries. This is a big one for things like the Muslim ban, for example. We planned a huge demonstration for the year anniversary of the Muslim ban on October 19th of last year. Got a ton of people out. This is a really, really good way to touch base with coalition partners and touch base with unlikely allies. Big important dates and anniversaries are things that not everybody can ignore. Whereas like if it's something that's more localized to your group, then you might not get that domestic or like kind of widespread attention. But bigger picture anniversaries, people will usually kind of tack in and be like, oh, hey, we should do something. Introducing local resolutions in a national press strategy. This is something we're entertaining right now with a lot of our family detention work. Local resolutions are a really good way to start a tide of change. I know that a lot of us get kind of caught up in federal narratives and the way that things are going federally, but local resolutions and local government really can influence legislators on a federal level and really can show transitions and trends to people who are working either in coalition or on kind of a federal agenda. So don't I guess what I'm saying is don't underestimate your local legislature. You never know what they can pull off. You never know what they can do. And also people from the local legislature are probably maybe eyeing careers in politics down the line, and this is where they're getting their experience. And so it's not a bad thing to know the not so little guy. You know, people in local legislatures are really doing a lot of the kind of you know, they're getting their hands dirty. They're doing the real work. So that's something that's important. So introducing local resolutions, working with your local politicians, and then combining that with a national press strategy. So say we get like 10 local laws passed on family detention in Texas. That's enough for someone at the Washington Post to take notice and say, hey, people in Texas are speaking up. 10 different communities in Texas have decided to pass resolutions on family detention, and that means that maybe Texas is turning blue. You never know. F is local media impact plus federal movement on legislation. This is very similar to what I've discussed before. And then G, Rotary religious student groups plus IS outputs. Especially for bigger picture kind of crisis situations, the IS is really good at putting out kind of research findings and reports and tools to kind of get people to involve themselves in that work. Trying to kind of take those outputs to Rotary and religious and student groups and saying, hey, we have something to mobilize around can be a really good way to get people to collectively act on something, even when those dates or timelines aren't so clear. Yeah, so once again, this is by far the most important slate of the entire webinar. So yeah, just consider press and advocacy equals impact. Just remember that. Skill build, letter to the editor. So this is something that's going to be kind of hard to do through webinar, but there are worksheets that we have that are up on the Member Hub listing. Letters to the editor are a really good way to kind of communicate your community's position on something, and having kind of a name like Amnesty International behind you can usually help get your letter to the editor placed. They're usually short letters, 250 words or less. They're either responding to a published piece or raising an issue of concern. Best practices, make it timely. When possible, respond to a published story. This doesn't mean that you can, can't write a letter to the editor and then just wait for a news hook to kind of tack it to. That's definitely what most people do, to be frank. The second thing is stick to a few key points. Use clear, simple language. I say usually just say 3 things, say them well, say them simply, say them clearly, and then provide a call to action. So what are you asking the reader to do? What are you asking the newspaper to do? What are you asking the legislator to do? A call to action oftentimes is called a CTA. A lot of people call it that who are kind of pulling insider baseball. So if you ever hear that term, that's what a CTA is. Feel free to touch base with us. You can reach us at media@aiusa.org. We have a huge media team who are super, super talented, who are here to help you through this. So just remember that. Please note there is a worksheet to work through letters to the editor on the webinar, where the webinar is listed on the Member Hub. Here's a sample structure just to go through it. The primary point. This is about the Rohingya, obviously. Oh no, it's not. It's about the Muslim ban, excuse me. It is unconscionable that people from several Muslim majority countries are again blocked from entering the US. Back up your claim and demonstrate human rights impact. President Trump's ban on refugees and visitors from these countries is senseless and discriminatory. This ruling has added to the confusion, fear, and anxiety facing millions of people. And then the call to action. This is where you really want to be strong. I would like to thank Senators X, Y, and Z for supporting legislation that nullifies the executive order, or I call on senators to intervene and stop this ban once and for all. So the Muslim ban was a really, really big issue for AIUSA, and we encouraged a lot of our people to write letters to the editor on the issue and trying to make sure that the human rights violations and impact were fully considered by the people who were influencing decisions based on the Muslim ban and constructing policy during this time. Workshop a campaign. This is also something that I can do with you on a one-to-one level. If you ever have any questions or concerns, be sure to get in touch with your FO and I can do that with you. Yeah. How can AI USA support you? Remember, you are the solutions. And B, use the skills you have in your back pocket to respond. We're here to work with you. This is kind of meant to encourage you to figure out what relationships you have, what skills you have, what you have within your local group, what you have within your own power map. I think something that plagues a lot of groups in our universe is trying to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again. You don't need to do that. It's totally unnecessary. A lot of this stuff it's not straightforward. It's extremely nuanced, but it is workable. And if you're working on something super, super hard and you get stuck, don't forget that AI USA is here to support you. Not to mention the fact that probably someone's faced a similar problem and we can talk you through it. So yeah, that's it for now. And I wanted to thank you again. Once again, my name is Sheetal Deer, and I'm the Senior Crisis Campaigner here at Amnesty International. Please feel free to let me know if you need any help or you have any questions or concerns. Thanks again for joining. Bye.